You could have a $6,000 instrument, and if it's not set up, you will not be able to play it.
They're kind of like democratizing the whole thing of saxophone or instrument purchase, aren't you? You're making it affordable, but also a good quality saxophone at an affordable price, which I think is really cool.
Having the right teacher,
Yeah,
having the
definitely.
right plan, having the right infrastructure for learning, we see that as just as important or more than having the right instrument.
Can you get a great saxophone these days for just a few $100s or pounds online? And will it actually play well for you? Well, today I'm talking to Tim Zenderman from JeanPaul USA. They make fantastic, affordable saxophones. And actually, you'll find out in this conversation how they are rethinking the whole industry for saxophones, how affordable they are, and how they're helping to encourage more people to start playing saxophone. So if you're looking for your first saxophone or maybe considering upgrading, then stick around because I think you'll find this conversation really interesting. Hey, real quick, just before we do dig into the conversation, if you enjoy learning saxophone and you love this podcast, could you do us a massive favor by just sharing it to one other person? Honestly, it would be so helpful to us to really make our day. Thanks a bunch. Okay, let's get stuck in. Hey Tim, great to talk to you today. I'm a massive fan of your saxophones, and loads of our members actually play JeanPaul saxes. So I know you've been big supporters of us too. But this is what I wanted to dig into today. I see lots of members joining sax school as brand new saxophone players. So they're really excited to start, but they don't know anything about the process of buying a saxophone. So the first place they go, of course, is eBay or Amazon, and they might be tempted by a really cheap instrument on Amazon. And there are some great cheaper instruments on Amazon, but there's also some problems. Can you give us a bit of your view of what the pitfalls are when people do go to something like Amazon blindly looking for their first saxophone in a lower price range?
Yeah, I think one of the most important things, well, actually, and before I jump into that, we're big fans of yours too, Nigel, and we love everything that you do. So we're happy to support in any way that we can. Now, when buying on eBay and Amazon, it's critical to understand who you're buying from. The seller it matters much more than the actual instrument that you're buying. It's not the same to be buying Yamaha student horn that has been mistreated for many years, and then being resold on eBay that you might have to invest five, six, $700 to bring it up to speed versus the same instrument, but from a seller that is sending the instrument in good condition. So looking at who is selling the instrument is vitally, vitally important.
I guess you've got that follow-up then if something goes wrong, right? Because I
Exactly.
suppose a lot of people who are in that situation of being new to learning saxophone, they aren't really aware of what the technical hurdles might be with a saxophone, because it's not like, I don't know, a kettle or something. There's things that can go wrong with it, not only mechanically in using it, but also when it gets shipped to you. So that support network is really important, isn't it?
Making sure that the seller has a warranty or some kind of promise that if anything happens during shipping, they're going to take care of it. It's critically important. So we sell our instruments direct on our website, Amazon, as well as eBay. Um, and when things come up during shipping, we take care of it completely. We either replace the instrument or we have them, if it's a small adjustment that needs to be made, we ask them to go to a local repair shop, they make the adjustment, and we cover the cost. So something similar to that, I think, is the absolutely like super important.
Peace of mind, isn't it? Yeah, absolutely. It's that's a really good point, and not always something that's obvious though when you're buying on Amazon, I suppose. And the other thing that people are nervous about generally is buying a substandard, lower priced instrument. And do you think that that's just a bit of a hangover from years gone by? Because the standard of instruments coming from China these days is great, right?
So that's a great question. It's a little bit of both, right? As a brand new player, you get an instrument And if you can't play something, you don't know if it's the instrument or if it's you. And that could be a huge detractor from actually getting started and frustration, right? So again, it's even more important to be buying from a reputable company and somebody that's going to support you. If you have any trouble, you have any problems getting started, you could reach out to them and say, "Hey, I'm not able to play this note in tune, or this is sounding off. Can you help me?" Um, and so that's absolutely fundamental. In terms of the quality coming out of China, it's a very big spectrum. And I think there is absolutely that hangover from years gone by, right? 20, 30 years ago, instruments coming out of China were not what they are today. We carefully pick the partners that we work with in China, and the instruments that we manufacture there, especially our Pro line, is it's fantastic. It is I mean, you've got the instrument there.
Yeah, I've
Um,
actually got it right here. Like this is your tenor. So that's the JeanPaul TS860. That's their Pro model tenor in a silver finish. What do you think of the sound? Hey, by the way, just before we do get back to the conversation, just a quick reminder that if you want to improve your sax playing this year, remember to follow the podcast so you don't miss any future episodes. And if you enjoy this episode too, maybe give us a 5-star review. Honestly, if you're feeling generous, it would really make our day. Thanks a bunch. Okay, let's get back to the episode. I wanted to find out a bit more about what you guys are doing specifically as a brand. But one point before we get onto that I thought was interesting is I've seen quite a spectrum. I agree with you. I've seen a spectrum of quality of Chinese instruments. The thing that concerns me the most is when I see a member who's bought a saxophone and it's come with the white gloves in and all the bits of cork still pinning it down, and it's clearly just come out of a factory in China and been shipped directly to the person's house. And they get this thing, and sometimes things are not working. They don't know how to get it set up. It's a bit of a worry versus a well set up saxophone, which is a whole different thing entirely. So for somebody who doesn't understand that process, what does it mean when a saxophone is set up between the factory and the customer?
the difference is night and day. And one of the things that so my dad started JeanPaul 12 years ago, 13 years ago. And one of the first things that he realized selling online is that the setup was a critical part of the success of JeanPaul. So early on, he started building a team of technicians here in Miami that inspects, sets up, and play tests every single instrument before it ships out. So you could have a $6,000 instrument, and if it's not set up, you will not be able to play it. And you could have a $500 or $600 instrument that is well set up, and a pro will sound like a pro sounds because the setup makes all the difference.
Yeah, and all in that setup, I suppose it's a lot of different things for anybody who's not aware. It's making sure that all the adjustments are correct and the heights of the corks and even simple things like your mouthpiece is going to fit well. That there's not been any issue with shipping that's caused a problem. Something not been knocked around or anything. Yeah, I think it makes a massive difference. And I have to say that when you guys sent me over this tenor, one of your technicians made me a little video and showed me them playing it and just talked me through the saxophone and then said, this is your saxophone, this is what it sounds like, and then they shipped it off and it arrived in fantastic playing order actually. And I thought, it's a bit like buying a fancy car or something. It just gives you that good feeling of confidence that you're getting something that's great. And I don't know if you do that with all of your saxophones, but yeah, I appreciated that when you sent me this Pro saxophone. Was that something you did special for me, or is that something you do for all your customers?
Yeah, so this is something that we started doing about a year and a half ago, and we do for all pro instruments that we send to everybody. And we do it as a surprise. We don't advertise it right now. I think it's a really special touch. I would love to be able to do it for everybody that buys, I mean, even the student and intermediate series horns. But we gotta improve some processes so that it's scalable and we can actually put that video together for everybody. But yeah,
Yeah,
we send it
good
to
idea though.
everybody. Yeah.
Ah, cool. Love it. Love it. Okay, so let's just have a chat about your background. So, you and your dad and the rest of the company, that's JeanPaul USA. And as a brand, I mean, it's something that's quite familiar to me. I've seen you guys with your saxophones on Amazon and eBay for quite a while. And like I said, a lot of our members have them. And I've got a couple kicking around here that you've sent me that I've had a play around with and actually been really pleasantly surprised. I think they're great. What's most amazing to me is the price point because your starter student altos are about 600 US dollars and tenors about $900, something like that. And then the pro model's about $1,500, 2,200 for the tenor. So that's definitely on the affordable range for a student instrument and definitely quite a lot cheaper than the main brand sort of pro level saxophones. It makes it quite affordable. So just talk me through the process of how you guys got set up and what was the logic behind what you're doing.
About 15 years ago, um, my dad had a distribution company actually that he started 35 years ago, and they've been distributors for big brands like Yamaha. And eventually, I think in the early 2000s, they were the biggest distributor of Yamaha instruments in Latin America. So,
Wow.
yeah, they were very, 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 very familiar. They are very familiar with the entire catalog and all the instruments. And on a business trip down to Central America, he was at the reception in the reception area. He was waiting for a cab to come, and he was listening to a duo at the. They were playing. I think it was a piano and saxophone. And when the saxophone, when the saxophonist finished playing, he went up to him. He saw that he had a Yamaha. He congratulated on how well he had played, and said, "I see that you have a Yamaha saxophone. I'm actually the distributor. So thank you for you have a beautiful instrument." He said, "Thank you, but this instrument is not mine. I get it lent to me from the conservatory so that I can make a living." And so my dad said, like, how is it possible that you make your living playing this thing and you can't own it? I mean, it's already hard enough, and it takes years and years and years and years of learning and practice to become an expert. How could it be that the tool that you need you can't afford, right? So that kind of stuck with him. He got back to the States, and in different conversations, he found that it was a similar situation. So many families were struggling with the same thing, right? Kids coming home. Here in the US, it's very, I mean, playing saxophone in the a band is a big thing. So it's not uncommon for your 10-year-old to come home and say, "Hey, mom, dad, I want to learn the saxophone. Here's a list of the recommended instruments that my band teacher told me I should buy. 1,200, 1,500, $1,800. Son, just go and play soccer. Uh, we'll keep saxophone for another day." Right? It sucks. It's sad. And so, there are so many musicians. My dad's got tons of stories of kids that almost didn't get into music because their parents were pushing them away, and then ended up becoming incredibly talented musicians that went on to Berkeley, and other music schools here in the US, and just became really, really talented musicians. And they were this close to not playing music at all because of how costly it was. So this didn't sit right with my dad. My dad, um, when an opportunity came up, he went to China. He started investigating different factories, having different saxophones tried out here in Miami with different technicians and musicians until he landed on the AS400, which is our student line alto. And so we started working with that horn and grew the line to include clarinet, flute, trumpet, always focusing on um, a team of technicians setting up and play testing every horn before it ships out.
Yeah, fantastic. So you're kind of like democratizing the whole thing of saxophone or instrument purchase, aren't you? You're making it affordable, but also a good quality saxophone at an affordable price, which I think is really cool. And I love that whole concept of opening up the doors to more people, more families to be able to get started. Because at the end of the day, if more people aren't learning saxophone, then where's the future of saxophone going to be, 20 years down the track?
Yeah. And there's just one more thing that I want to. So our slogan is also wind instruments for the people. But there's one more thing that I want to point out here that I think is very relevant to what you do and incredibly important. So we we pass on the savings from, we take out all the middlemen, the retailers and the distributors, so that the people that want to play and the kids that want to start playing the saxophone can. Because the hardest part about learning music is not the actual instrument. The instrument should just not get in your way, but the hardest part is actually putting in the time and the education. So if you spend less on the saxophone, that means that you have more resources to spend on education, which is actually the most important thing to learn, right? So having the right teacher,
Yeah,
having the
definitely.
right plan, having the right infrastructure for learning, we see that as, you know, just as important or more than having the right instrument. So
No, I love that. I love that. And yeah, that's fantastic. It makes perfectly good sense to me. And even better when you can do it at a price point that people can get, and the instrument itself is actually good quality. Yeah, it's fantastic. So we mentioned that you've got the AS400 and you've got a Pro model line. Is there an intermediate as well?
so for the alto, not yet, but it is in the works. We do have a tenor intermediate right now that has been around for less than a year, um, making some improvements on that horn now as well. This should hopefully be out before the end of the year. So
Cool,
yeah,
cool. And soprano and baritone as well?
we have the soprano. We have the pro soprano, which is our straight soprano. It's a fantastic horn. You haven't tried that horn out yet, have you?
No, I have one. I have one. You've sent me one actually. It's over there.
Perfect.
I feel like I've got all
Awesome.
of your saxophones, Tim. What's going on?
Yeah. I
I'm
think you
like the
have
US
the
branch for John Paul.
yeah, you have the complete pro series, right? You have the alto, tenor, and soprano.
I've got the yes, I think I do. The alto, the soprano, and the tenor. Yeah, you haven't sent me the Barry sax yet.
So the
I'm just
Barry
joking.
sax
Just
is
joking.
It's going to cost an arm and a leg to ship.
Yeah, okay, absolutely.
But
No, but
yeah,
I'm really impressed with
berries.
all of them. I like that soprano, and in fact, when the other teachers have been, the other saxophone guys have been here, they've been amazed with it as well. It's a really surprising instrument for the price. Because actually, I think soprano is one of those saxophones that it's difficult to do a lower cost one well because everything's smaller. It's got to be more accurate, and sometimes they can be quite out of tune. Yours plays great, actually.
Yep, yep, absolutely. I agree wholeheartedly with you. But yeah, it also, I mean, goes back to the what we were talking about before about the quality of instruments coming out of China, right? 30 years ago or 40 years ago, they said the same thing about Yamaha and Japanese manufacturing, right? Um, so things have changed.
I hadn't thought about that. I hadn't thought about that because these days everybody expects a Japanese instrument to be really well made, and they are
Yeah,
great. I mean, Yamahas,
they are.
Kanigasawas, they are fantastic. But people have that mindset straight away that yeah, of course they're well made because they're from Japan.
Yeah, absolutely. And but it wasn't always that way, right? There was a time when the best instruments in the world were coming out of France, um, and only France, or the US, that these Japanese. I mean, so when did Yamaha start making saxophone? Was that in the 60s?
That's a great question. I don't know.
Yeah.
I've got a Yamaha 62 over there, which I bought in like 1987, and it was quite
Uh-huh.
established then. So yeah,
Okay.
I don't know. That'd be something interesting to find out, actually.
Yeah, I've talked to older saxophonists, and they've talked to me about this. Like, how could this company that manufactures motorcycles also be really good at manufacturing or boat engines and also be manufacturing saxophones?
It's about production quality.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, that's right. It's about processes. And I've spoken to other people who have been involved with the instrument manufacturing industry in China. And they've explained to me how the factories, you said about how the instruments got so much better. And other people have told me how the factories where they were making the instruments used to be really, really basic. They weren't like a car factory. They were more like a cowshed, you know, and everything's getting better, I suppose. The processes, the conditions, and the craftsmanship. So I guess that's just evolution. So what's the plans with John Paul then? I know you guys are getting more and more visible over here in the UK. Do you have some more sort of plans on how you're going to expand and reach more people?
Yeah, so our lineup is still growing. We've got to fill in some of the intermediate horns, like the tenor that we have now, but we're making some improvements to the alto that will hopefully be released before the end of the year. We want to bring on to the bari sax, which we didn't get to finish talking about, which
Oh
I'd
yeah,
love for
come
you
on
to
then.
try out when we have it ready. So we had the BS 600. That was an intermediate bari that we carried a few years ago, but it was discontinued, and we're now working on a new bari sax because I mean we get asked about that every day. Um,
Do you?
and
Do you? Is there a lot of demand for Barry Sachs? That's interesting.
Absolutely, especially for, might I add, a an affordable bari sax,
An affordable,
right?
good Barry Sachs.
Correct. An affordable, good berry sax.
Yeah, you've got a unicorn there if you can create that. I'm curious, when you say that you're developing a Barry Sachs, like what's that process look like? Are you actually talking with the factories and working through things? Tell me how that works.
Yeah. So we have a product development team here in Miami. Um, we work with the factories. Well, we start feeling out different factories in China. until we pick the factory that we want to work with, and then we iterate on the design, and we make changes to the instrument until we get to the instrument that we love and that we think is the perfect instrument for that price point and that level of horn. What that means is it depends on whether it's a student, intermediate, or pro level horn that we're looking to build.
So there's lots of variables in there, I suppose, isn't there? I mean, obviously there's things we all see on when we're shopping for a saxophone. The finish, I suppose, is it in a gold lacquer or is it in silver? But there's fundamental things, I guess, about the material that the body's made from, the style of the key work, even things like
Absolutely.
pads and springs, I suppose, right?
All of that. Yeah. So the finish is kind of the final detail, but a lot of other things have to check out before that. And everything that you mentioned, the quality of the pads, the key work, the springs, the silencing mechanisms. Um, but I mean,
Even the
the
case, right?
even absolutely, yeah, in the carrying case as
Yeah.
well. Um, we that the carrying cases that we send our instruments with are especially for the student horn. It's a fantastic horn because it has an ABS shell on the outside, so it's really, 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 really solid. Um,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
going back to the development of the instrument, it's not even just about what you see, like the keywork, the pads. It's even with the inside of the horn, right? The finish of the rods, the pivot screws. Um, there's lots of moving parts inside the horn that we make iterations upon as well.
Right. Interesting. Interesting. Yeah. See, that's what I love. I love to hear that because, at the start of the conversation, we were talking about that quandary of looking at a lower price saxophone and not understanding the difference from one to another when you're purely looking at what color is it, how much does it cost. There's so much more involved in the way the instruments are prepared and like from the factory, prepared by the company that's selling them before they come to you, and then the support that you have afterward with that instrument. And from our point of view as educators, when we're helping thousands of people, and it's really important when I have a student that comes to me and says, well, I bought this saxophone. I don't think this note's working. I can't get that note out that you're telling me to play. And when you hear it, it's obvious it's a mechanical issue. Well, okay, can you go back to where you bought it from, and can they help you? Can you get it repaired? And without that support and that backup, then it's very difficult. And that's the point, like you were talking about before, where people put off starting an instrument because they can't afford a saxophone. Well, that's another big hurdle that stops people's progress because they've finally got the saxophone. They're so excited, and then they hit a roadblock because the instrument may have a technical issue and they can't get it resolved easily. So getting through those first hurdles is so important to keep people's progress going. And then the ones that do, you're flying then, aren't you? So yeah, that's amazing. So nice to talk to you about this. And if people want to find out more about JeanPaul, we'll put a link down below. But where else can they find out about you guys?
Awesome. They can follow us on Instagram, JeanPaul Wins, and our website is jeanpaul.com. And I just want to add one more thing to what you were talking about. I think all of that is critically important. And trust, I think, is the word that is just so important to buying anything, especially like a saxophone that so many people need to play before they decide on it. So if you're buying an instrument like a saxophone without having played it before or having touched it or seen it, trust is critically important. And seeing what other people say and other people's experiences, um, that is kind of the most important thing, I think, or one of the most important things in deciding um, whether you want to buy or not.
Yeah, absolutely. You're lucky you've got I mean, well, I've made some videos of your JeanPaul saxophones, but there's other people talking about them too. And there's a reason why there's good feedback, because the saxophones are actually really, really good. So I hope if you are interested in looking for a beginner, or the other point actually is those pro level instruments are kind of like the first, I think of them as the first upgrade saxophone that people would look at. You know, maybe somebody starts their journey with something like your AS400 as their first starter saxophone. And in fact, I've got members who live in a few places and they have a few saxophones. So they'll have their main saxophone, and then they'll have maybe like one of your AS400s in their holiday house, where they, or that they take with them when they're traveling with work or whatever. So that's often a starting point. But then I see people a year or 18 months down the track, or 2 years maybe, ready to upgrade. And that's where I think those pro saxes really are a good option, because they're affordable, but you know, a big step up from the student instrument. So whatever you're looking for in your journey, I hope you check out JeanPaul. And Tim, thanks so much for having a chat with us today. Hey, I really hope you found that interesting. We'll put links to everything down below, or you can go and pop over to our website to get a full transcription of this episode at saxschoolonline.com/podcast. Don't forget, there's new episodes coming out all the time. So don't forget to follow us so you don't miss out on future episodes. But most importantly, keep practicing hard, and we'll catch you next time.